You're probably familiar with the classic American motorcycle, raked out front end, burbling V-twins, and leather. Lots and lots of leather. This image of the cruiser is dominant in American motorcycling and abroad. I mean, it makes sense. Think about how huge the country is, and if you're making your way down hundreds of miles of straight highways, what better way to do it on than a comfortable and torquey machine that hums along at low revs? However, one American had a different idea of what an American motorcycle could be, and that guy's name was Eric Buell. To understand Buell motorcycles and the subsequent EBR is to understand Eric and his unwavering passion for bikes. It's a story of tenacity, dedication, and a classic can-do attitude. Eric was born in Gibsonia, Pennsylvania, which sounds like a made-up place, but Eric Buell had to have some borderline mythical origin story. He spent his days tooling around with machinery on a farm and developed a passion for tinkering. As he grew older, he became more and more enthralled with motorcycles and eventually, because he's a total badass, started racing motocross and became interested in road racing. I find that the most interesting business owners and people come from some sort of racing background, and Eric is no exception. This guy was wrenching on bikes during the day and taking engineering classes at night at the University of Pittsburgh. After finishing up his classes, he flew himself down to Milwaukee and shoved his metaphorical racing boot in the door of Harley Davidson and landed a job. Eric was involved in several concept bikes, and he worked for the now infamous Porsche-designed V4 and made significant contributions to the company. Then, in 1981, Eric did something that would alter the course of his life. He heard about a company called Barton that was designing and building general-purpose engines and decided to buy their limited production 750cc racer. I mean, think about how weird that is for a second. This guy who works on concept bikes and at Harley-Davidson takes a huge chance on an unproven race bike just for shits and giggles. Well, and by shits and giggles, I mean he used his extensive knowledge to design and create a stronger and better bike because the original one was shit, apparently. For someone like Eric, buying a proven platform and racing it is just too easy. He was able to make gains on the motor, but Buell deemed the chassis a lost cause, so he just built his own chassis from the ground up. That's the kind of dude we're talking about here. He just straight up forged his own chassis when the original one didn't work out. In 1982, Buell had a running race machine and decided to put it to the test at the AMA National. He named his creation the RW750 for Road Warrior 750cc. It's a bit cheesy, but again, who am I to argue with the dude who built his own goddamn chassis? Anyways, he found mild success with the bike and he kept refining it. In 1982, however, Barton was shutting down and gave Eric the option to purchase the stock of spare engines, design, and basically all the intellectual property, and because I assume Eric probably represented 100% of their customer base. If they had an email list back then, it'd be one line long with eric.buell@badass.com as the address. Buell then, because it appears he's a technical genius but is also a few screws loose in the head, asked Harley Davidson for financial help to develop this stupidly fast bike from Barton that he redesigned. They, of course, said no. So Eric Buell said, "I'll go build my own motorcycles with blackjack and hookers," and that's what he did. In 1984, Buell had his beast, a screaming 750cc bike that was ready to compete. So let's head out to the AMA and kick some ass, all American style. Wait, just kidding, we're gonna change the AMA rules, god damn it. Eric Buell now had a bike that wasn't ready to compete. So what did Eric do in the interim? He shoved Harley engines into his kick-ass chassis and he sold them. He had some contacts at Harley still and was able to snag some XR1000 engines, which were quite potent for the time. Buell was convinced he could build proper American racing motorcycles and that they would sell. Using the XR1000 engine, he pieced together his RR1000. Eric kept innovating, and fun fact, the wraparound fairing design of the RR1000 had a lower aerodynamic drag than all but a few handful of even current 24th century sport bikes. Buell continued building better bikes with bigger engines and even managed to sell a few. Then something bizarre happened. Eric was rocking and rolling, building race bikes and living the dream. Harley Davidson caught wind, and seeing as he was a former employee, they sneaked him onto a cruise ship during a corporate event. No one really knows what happened on the cruise ship, but I imagine it went something like this. "Yo, Eric, you seem like a pretty cool guy. You keep building all these dope bikes, and hey, stop turning that mojito into a piston. Sorry, I can't help myself. Listen, we want to strike up a deal. We can be living this dank-ass cruise ship lifestyle for years to come if you let Harley Davidson in on what you're doing." "Okay." One of the first initiatives that Buell had was to design and build a suitable beginner bike. Even back then, the beginner bike segment was all important. Harley's smallest bike at the time was an 883 Sportster, which beginners found big and bulky and just didn't want to buy. Eric put his mind to the test and developed what is largely considered an awful bike from just about anyone who's ever ridden it, seen it, thought about it, or attempted to masturbate to it. Why did the Buell Blast suck? It was super ugly, built to a budget, it was a beginner bike, remember, and it just didn't really stack up to the other beginner bikes in the segment. The Blast is a much maligned bike, even though, personal opinion, I don't think it's a sin against the motorcycle gods as much as other people do. It looks like a tiny workhorse of a bike and it does the job. In 2003, Harley doubled down and bought the rest of Buell, so now it was a wholly owned subsidiary of Harley-Davidson. Eric was still at the helm designing the bikes, however, they suffered from a fundamental problem. Buell was very interested and very good at designing a chassis, but the engines were still coming from a Harley Sportster, so what you were left with was this odd combo of a bike that had all this forward-thinking tech and chassis, but an absolute dog of an engine. Eric quickly realized that Harley's engines were not best suited for his task. He needed a liquid-cooled, proper engine in his bikes, which is what the V-Rod was meant for, but Harley had other ideas for that engine. Eric turned to Rotax, which would become his new engine supplier. He then conceived of an 1125cc superbike that would finally realize his dream. But again, Harley got in the way, and what ended up was this weird sports touring thing that really wasn't so great. Now we get into the real meat of the drama. Starting in 2009, Harley, being much more American corporation than American motorcycle manufacturer, subscribed to the belief that all corporations do. Money is God, maximize profits, and fuck everything else. In this pursuit, they placed a new CEO named Keith Wendell, who realized that cruisers that were marked up to damn near $30,000, had zero R&D costs, brought in a way higher margin than Eric's sport bikes. So in a cold and calculating move, Eric's brand was gutted for cost-cutting measures, which led to this reaction from Eric, which is absolutely heartbreaking.
Hello, I'm Eric Buell. Our small team in Wisconsin have been building America's sport motorcycles since 1983. We have built amazing and exciting world-class bikes. So it is a very emotional time for me right now, as I have to announce that the decision has been made that we will no longer be building Buell motorcycles. I have also had the great fortune to meet and get to know many Buell riders over the years, and they are an amazing and interesting group of free thinkers. There is a camaraderie that is deep, real, and passionate. I will always be proud of America's little sport bike company who took on the world, and with brilliant innovations produced some of the best handling motorcycles of all time. We proved that a small group of passionate and inspired people can compete against industry giants. May you ride with pride into the future, and may your roads ahead be as adventuresome and rewarding as mine have been for the last 26 years.
If that doesn't at least give you the chills, you're a heartless monster. This is a man who devoted his entire life to building this dream, and he had it quashed because of the bottom line. Some additional corporate drama ensued when Rotax tried to buy up the brand but was blocked by Keith, which ended up really being a self-inflicted wound because the shutdown costs for Buell totaled around $125 million, and that was during Harley's worst sales year too. The worst part was, all of Buell's patents and intellectual property remained Harley's, which was a huge setback. However, Buell is not a quitter. That same year he founded Eric Buell Racing, or EBR for short, and he produced the 1190R, which used the Rotax engine. Testers found the bike to be an absolute beast, with mountains of torque and a chassis that flicked over fast and predictably. EBR managed to sell about 65 of these bikes and had a company with $3 million in revenue in only 18 months, which, if you're familiar at all with startups, it's pretty impressive. This prompted Eric to have the desire to make real bikes that people could own and ride every day, and not just $45,000 exotics reserved for the richest toys. And that's when Eric tumbled down again. Indian motorcycle manufacturer Hero Motor Corp became interested in EBR, and they acquired a 49% stake in the company for $25 million, or at a $50 million valuation. Eric used this influx of cash to hire and prep a race team, started to work on designing bikes that would take on the mass market Japanese and European bikes. But in 2015, it came crashing down again. EBR was bankrupt. They were valued at $50 million and needed to ramp up revenues really fast to justify that valuation, and they just couldn't match the sales to bring it up. Eric's ventures into racing were extremely costly and largely not visible to the consumer base he was looking to attract. But the story doesn't end there. After filing for receivership, the company was acquired by Liquid Asset Partners, and they decided to maintain the company intact and continue production. At this point in time, LAP is continuing operations. However, the long-term strategy is to build the business back up and then resell it at market value to investors. Eric Buell's story reminds me of the Greek fable of Sisyphus. In this story, the king of Ephyria was known to be a sly and deceitful person. Eric Buell wasn't deceitful, but stick with me here. As such, Hades was brought down to teach Sisyphus a lesson, but because Sisyphus was such a trickster, he managed to ensnare Hades in chains, and then the underworld couldn't accept lost souls into it, which is kind of funny thinking about the Greek underworld as this DMV that can't operate because Hades is in chains. Hades became furious and he sentenced Sisyphus to roll a boulder up a hill for eternity. As Sisyphus would roll this boulder up the hill, at the end of the day, it would inevitably roll back down. It's why in our modern world, we call a futile and difficult task Sisyphian. In my view, Eric Buell is the embodiment of a Sisyphean task, trying year after year to get his American sport bike off the ground, only to have his metaphorical boulder tumble back down so he can start again the next day. Eric Buell deserves the utmost respect. He has had a dedication and passion for motorcycle racing and building that few other people even come close to. I wish him nothing but the best in future with EBR, and I hope that he can cobble together a cohesive business plan with the help of his team, investors, and by building a fantastic motorcycle, which we all know he can do. Godspeed, Eric. And that's it, guys. What do you think of Eric Buell's story? Is he a mad genius or is he just mad? Let me know in the comments and let me know what other sort of videos you'd like to see in this history segment. And thanks for watching.